What's going on, everyone? Jeremy here from The Quartering. And if you've been following it's been a while since we talked about Joe Rogan making any kind of waves in the news cycle. He's had a few bizarre tweets that he promoted that ended up being fake. That was a bad look for him. But largely, he's basically remained out of the controversial limelight. But the other day, his old buddy Neil Young went on to Howard Stern. Now, these are two individuals that are super rich, and at least one of them has been widely reported, Howard Stern that is, as like too afraid to leave his own house. The man like lives in his house, he doesn't leave. He's got weird rules for people that come over because he's so afraid of this coof, just so afraid of it. He's living in a prison. Now, one of the nicest prisons on the planet, but still a prison nonetheless. Now, after about a year now, Neil Young has gone out and he's been coping and seething that his boycott didn't work. 1 year on, why did Neil Young's Spotify boycott fail to catch on? First thing mentioning is that the boycott was the product of what appeared to be a personal feud. The most successful boycotts, protests, and movements tend to be the reaction to a problem shared by a large number of people who have previously not been granted an opportunity to speak. The Me Too movement being a recent example. Though misinformation is certainly a problem, few people regard it as a tangible threat. Young was already an established artist. Essentially, Neil Young was butthurt. He wanted to pull his music off of Spotify because Joe Rogan dared to threaten the coof orthodoxy. By the way, we now are a year removed from this boycott, or his potential threat to boycott. And it seems like a lot has changed, hasn't it? A lot has changed. But it actually turns out... Now, the boycott didn't exactly go that bad. I mean, that it did have an effect. Joe Rogan reveals Spotify deal was almost pulled during his biggest controversy. When Joe Rogan first announced that he was taking his podcast to Spotify, plenty of fans were wary of the move, with concerns including the lack of video player, no more YouTube clips, and whether or not Spotify would have creative control. Rogan's massive deal meant he was able to get a few things addressed pretty quickly as the platform implemented videos, but the exclusivity and control by Spotify always loomed large. None more so than when he created the storm of the controversial guests he had on during the global health situation. At the time, Spotify CEO Daniel Ek compared Rogan's content to rappers, noting that they wouldn't censor him. However, a number of episodes from his back catalog were removed. It was that topic that Dave Portnoy brought up when he was a guest on episode 1920 of the JRE. Well, the people at Spotify weren't concerned. There were a couple of people, like tech people, that were upset, Rogan said, noting that there were complaints about misinformation and Spotify was apprehensive about some guests. There was a lot of pressure from advertisers. There was a lot of pressure from different people. Artists like Neil Young and Joni Mitchell pulled their music. It was touch and go. Rogan said his relationship with Spotify has always been great and praised them for standing by him. The GRE host has ultimately continued to have similar guests on the show that has sparked initial outrage as the pressure to sever the deal has died down. I mean, ultimately, people are paying a ton of money to get access to his podcast. His viewers are extremely loyal. I'm sure that they spend all the money that Spotify could possibly want. It's funny, though, that, it took Joe Rogan, who, essentially is as big as it gets. I guess Call Her Daddy is another one that's pretty popular on Spotify. But only he could have withstood this kind of amount of backlash. And then you have Neil Young going on Howard Stern and whining. He's trying to big time Joe Rogan here on Howard Stern.
Spotify has a podcast where they're putting out information about a vaccine. You are on Spotify. You make a lot.
Now, remember, Howard Stern is one of the biggest big pharma cucks on the planet.
A lot of money off of Spotify because your music is one of the most streamed artists of all time. You say, wait a second, Spotify, do not put shows on that put out false information about the COVID vaccine. But you didn't stop there. You took your music off of Spotify.
Howard, I woke up one morning and I heard somebody saying there was some scientists were saying something about COVID, or some doctors, and they were saying something about COVID and how many people were dying in the hospitals, and misinformation. And you see all the nurses and everything, and these people are with these people who are dying. I mean, this is
It's funny that, by the way, that again, that the attempted big time here. Hold on.
their life. That's what they do. They try to save people. So these people were distressed by the fact that Spotify was doing this misinformation with some show they had.
Some show they had. You mean the biggest podcast on the planet? You mean the biggest podcast on the planet?
And I listened to it, and I said, and they were saying he purposely is saying this stuff that he knows isn't true.
Do you have any evidence of that, Neil Young? Who's they, by the way? They are saying that he purposely put out this information. Who's they? You also put here, Myth Informed. Welcome back to Twitter, by the way, Myth Informed. Neil Young is claiming that Joe Rogan was purposely lying to his audience, which resulted in them passing away from the coof. You'd think he would at least remember the doctors' names that convinced him of this. It's utter nonsense. Like, he doesn't remember the doctors who told him this. He doesn't remember this, but he knows that Joe Rogan definitely was lying on purpose. I just want to remind you whose show he's on here. He's on Howard Stern's show. This is a man that said people who don't have the poke should be banned from hospitals. I wonder how his heart's doing. See this on January 19th episode of the show, the Howard Stern Show, the hospitals, blah, blah, blah. He said the hospital should not admit patients who are unpoked. Stern has often used his radio show to speak out against, again, Variety says it's anti-pokers. It's just people who don't have it. Like, for example, I don't have it, but I don't speak out against it. I don't tell people what they should and shouldn't do with their bodies. I have all my other pokes, right? Like whatever you get as a kid or whatever you get when you get to college and stuff. I have all that stuff. I just didn't want this particular one. You know what? Maybe things change. A couple years pass. We figure out some of the side effects possible. Whatever all these people are suddenly passing away, we figure that out. Maybe I would get it one day. But like right now, again, I am not against them, but I'm against rushing into injecting something into my body, which is, by the way, a liberal, like I thought liberals said that it was my body, my choice. People have been told that you will pass away if you get it. Some will live, but most of you will die. These people don't trust our government. Good. I remember that Howard Stern is a guy that, used to fight the power. He now lives in fear. Like, he now lives in complete fear. He's been working. People who don't wear masks are out of their minds. Again, this is a guy that has been in lockstep with the United States government and the CDC, shame and gone so far as to shame individuals for making their own personal health decisions. I mean, you get this clown, and by the way, I love Neil Young, his music. Love it. Doesn't really change. I kind of had to make that realization because, a lot of my favorite musicians are definitely liberals, and they all kind of drink the Kool-Aid. You see here, people at Spotify, the fact that they weren't concerned, I don't know if it was touch and go there for a while. I mean, that was Neil Young, the full weight of Neil Young and all the advertisers. And guess what? They just went away. Like, all the pressure just went away and everybody went back to living their lives. But if Howard Stern had his way, you would be disallowed any kind of medical advice or medical treatment because you chose to maybe wait on getting the poke. That's who this guy is. If you're new to the channel, make sure you click that subscribe button down below. And if you haven't yet, make sure you leave a like on the video. Check out coffeebrandcoffee.com. I've got a big sale going on today. It's the last day to get peppermint hot cocoa, the last day to get a couple of our Christmas flavored coffees. Use promo code TheQuartering to save. I hope you enjoyed this video, and we'll talk to you again real soon.